Alright, so this will be interesting. This is the one I'll watch instead of the Mega one because this is topical for what we were talking about. It came up. Yay. And then other people have been sci-fi writers that write for Star Wars in the expanded universe. Some have even been Star Trek writers.
I've noticed a trend in writing. It seems to be getting
Borderlands 3 from the get-go, okay.
common over time. It's a certain type of writing that I'm trying to describe. The best term I can think of to call it is...
No, it's not the focus, for sure. I'm going to restart this in a minute. It's not the focus of Star Wars at all, but there are things that support the world building when you start to flesh it out more, that are sci-fi elements. Especially when you have stories that don't involve the Force at all, you just focus on, say, the X-Wing series or the Rogue Squadron comics that don't have the Force in the comics themselves, or the novels. You see there's a lot more sci-fi elements in it.
I've noticed a trend in writing. It seems to be getting more common over time. It's a certain type of writing that I'm trying to describe. The best term I can think of to call it is millennial writing. You'll find out why. Okay, imagine this. You know those tweets that are like, capitalism low-key killed our vibe and gaslit us into being okay with our bosses and landlords taking our
I'm trying to think now. I didn't notice it very big. It probably will be, but we'll see.
excess value. And then it has like 250,000
Lock
likes.
on added it, of course.
I'm also just referring to the Twitter style of speaking, the tone and affectation and vocabulary. Now, have you noticed this style of writing in modern games? I'll go through some examples to shed further light. Remember the cringe Saints Row
Yuzhan anyway.
reboot or new Tales from the Borderlands? There is undeniably a certain style here. By the way, I'm using footage with credit from YouTube for these. All within fair use, because I'm sorry, but why on earth would I want to play these games? Why would you expect or even want anybody to play these games? Say what you will about Telltale movie games, Tales from the Borderlands was a very well written game, with
See, this is Borderlands before Borderlands 3. Tales from the Borderlands is good. And you don't have the type of things that he was talking about with people talking like tweets and the cringe streamer type thing they were trying to do with Borderlands 3. I'm having a brain fart. Don't worry, they put all that cringe stuff into the movie as well. I'm having a brain fart. What am I thinking of with Rogue Squadron? I think I've been up too late reading comics. My brain feels fried with some of the information. I've got the connection with Corin Horn in the novels. Was it they were talking about the Green Jedi? Or the Corellian Jedi? I think so. Anyway, a side little tangent. Trying to think. It doesn't happen at this time of the night.
Interesting characters. It'd be reasonable to be excited for the follow-up to that on the basis of your enjoyment of the previous one. What you may forget is that this game isn't made by Telltale. It's Gearbox, who made Borderlands 3. Borderlands 3 is an excellent example of this style as well. In fact, the gradual collapsing quality of Borderlands writing maps onto this trend really well. Borderlands 3 had excessive pop culture references, like a mission where you need to get the big suck. I can just imagine the Millennial writers sitting back in their room chuckling at that, a wry grin on their face for the new level of comedy they just unlocked. The main villains being streamers. It doesn't even say anything, it just has them as streamer cult leaders. Like, ooh, streamers are cult leaders. How so? At least
It's a big change and a very big downgrade from the writing of Borderlands 2.
have some sort of evidence of that or present a critique. None of the characters are really built up and there are no rewarding arcs. It's like the writers are entitled. They just expect that we care about these characters. The moments in the game don't carry any weight or impact. Maya's death was so obviously avoidable and contrived. An obnoxious character like Tiny Tina was acceptable in 2012 when we didn't know any better, but they just kept riffing on the same annoying aspects of these characters without moving on. They just can't let go of these so random characters. Why do I care if Atlas wins this corporate war? Apparently Maliwan is an evil corporation. Corporate assholes. But so are the guys we're fighting for. And the game just presents it as good and evil. They naturally cap it off with a girl power ending, despite how poorly they resolved the conflict between Ava and Lilith, you know, the protagonists of the story, and the brain-dead reveal of Tannis being a super powerful secret siren this whole time. And whenever they talk, they're always super verbose. They just keep talking and talking for far longer than is necessary. And if you have no clue what I'm talking about, don't worry. It's nonsense anyway. I think there's this famous post that pretty excellently sums up Borderlands writing. They can't go one line without stuffing it full of ironic observation as their form of jokes. The normal line would be like, if you can get some fuel canisters, then I can reactivate the main generator and get our shields back up. I mark the objective on your map. Versus the Gearbox line, hey buddy, great job killing those mutants and all. You're really good at that. Shooting things, that is. One problem.
I mean, there's a middle ground here, right? Because you don't want to just be like, oh yeah, now go point A to point B. You want to make the dialogue sound more interesting than that. But, yeah.
Oh, though. As it turns out, a bunch of monsters on this planet are going
And
to
do you know who raised Zoomers? Millennials.
our eyes out if we don't get the shield back up. And this is just my opinion, but that's gonna suck. Not having eyes sounds terrible. Like, how am I supposed to read my collection of bodacious space babes without any flippin' eyeballs? So here's my brilliant plan that I got written on this here napkin. I won't go on. You can pause and read the rest of it, but you get the idea. Now, imagine everything about Borderlands 3 writing, but worse. That is Tales from the Borderlands. The worst thing about Gearbox is that they just...
I was half thinking that I could play the new Tales from the Borderlands and take the piss out of it on stream, but I mean, if I have to sit through that, I don't know.
Don't get the memo. Are they addicted to sniffing their own farts or something? Why aren't they trying to improve their writing after literally everybody criticizes it?
You are good ex, who this?
They assassinate the character of Reese. In fact, he's basically a different character entirely to the one from Tales. Now he's the corporate arsehole, basically taking on the exact same role as his enemy in Tales. In Borderlands 3, there was some gag about how his favorite frozen yogurt place got destroyed.
Oh, that's it. Say goodbye to your favorite Frogurt stand.
Friends, Frogurts, anything but friends, Frogurts. I mean, they give you that.
Oh, I can just imagine it. Some 30-something with an English degree paid for by their parents whose greatest trauma, besides getting trolled on Twitter, is their favorite food place which they would visit in between sessions of making PowerPoints in their Mac shutting down. And they brought that trauma into the game. Now apparently they thought this frozen yogurt gag was so funny that they had to revive it for the next game as the basis for one of the characters, as if it was some beloved gag. So this Frogurt place is on Prometheum, a fictional planet that looks remarkably like San Francisco, and of course it's very diverse, or rather it reflects the demographics of San Francisco. If the point of representation is to introduce new and different viewpoints, then this is achieving the exact opposite of that. It feels like these stories only represent the experiences of young, wealthy, inner-city tech people from the coastal cities of America, an extremely small niche, Twitter addicts.
Hey, Papa Girardi! I can smell your space calzones from here!
Right. I mean, that is a real thing. Closing this door. And yeah, that's possibly an execution thing not being great. Because it could be definitely you fight a corporate boss, you become the corporate boss, and then you turn into them. That's definitely a thing that could be good. If the writing's good as well, you know. You know what I mean? I think his issues with the writing more than the concept and ideas and general arcs. Because of course you have to have that, since we see the character so much in Tales and then in Borderlands 3, you want to see that transformation occurring as well.
Thanks! I need a new name for them.
Might also need to stop doing that problematic accent.
Yeah, I know.
A lot of the references and lingo just feel out of touch.
Miss Johnson! Did you get a cybernetic leg? That thing's straight fire.
Like they're trying to be younger than they actually are.
I mean, I like that joke. Maybe I like the joke.
Cybernetic leg? That thing's straight fire.
Except for there was no reason to show the flamethrower at the end. They could drop that line and then they get attacked or something, and then she's using the flamethrower to fight people or something.
Like they're trying to be younger than they actually are. A lot of the language feels like 5 years out of date. And there's a certain character design. The shaved on one side and long hair swept on the other. The brightly coloured hair. It's extremely common. There are also adult characters who speak like children, or just generally speak in a really condescending or patronising tone.
While I examine this unimaginably complex and priceless alien artifact, you may wait outside and steal anything not nailed down.
There was
That's always how Tannis has been though, and there's law reasons why she talks like that, and she is condescending. Like, that actually makes sense. That part of it actually makes sense, other than that she randomly somehow got the siren powers. But the dialogue for Tannis is fine.
was the new Saints Row reboot as well. We knew it was going to be terrible before launch, and we weren't surprised at all. They made the main characters into a bunch of broke college kids, and they're all dealing with student debt and rent and complaining about capitalism. They try to borrow some internet lingo like wage slave. They're super verbose.
Right.
They do not stop haranguing the player with dialogue, and they use expletives like they're meant to be edgy, or they're just funny on their own.
That is part of a problem I found with some writing, is that they use a lot of expletives for no reason.
Damn fucking shitballs on a stick with a side order of mother-loving, shit-smothered, piss-covered ass crack!
It's like they get a kick out of swearing for no reason. Also, it's super funny that characters are talking about their carbon footprint.
Your carbon footprint always matters.
So relatable, am I right, fellow millennials? People talk about that on Twitter, right? They really do talk about capitalism a lot. They don't really say much about it though. They just say the word and we're supposed to think, I don't even know, like, wow, you're really culturally aware.
I've told you before, the idols are trying to build a post-capitalist society where money is not a concept.
The original series started as a GTA clone and got progressively more wacky and outlandish. The humor was extremely crass. It recognized the absurdity and cranked it up as high as possible. It was self-aware before self-aware humor became really tired. They certainly did make pop culture references, but, like Borderlands, this style of humor was more apt in 2012. It feels like they haven't
Cultural references!
really grown since then. They've had to tone down a lot of the most vulgar elements of the humor from previous games, which just doesn't work because vulgarity was the core of the humor in them. And again,
I mean, why are you complaining about them putting in expletives in one thing and then saying about the core of the humor was vulgarity? Like, I love Saints Row the Third and that, but it's like, yeah, you're kind of being hypocritical there. I mean, I just said that too, didn't I? But the dialogue in Saints Row the Third and that didn't feel like they were putting the swears in there just to try and sound funny.
And we see the same character design, the Skrillex cut, the dyed hair. You see it in so many games, it's like they're reading from the same guidebook.
There's definitely a place for referential humour, for sure, but then, you know,
now, something
write
that
it
feels
better.
similar, but is harder to place my finger on, is the new Wolfenstein games. The New Order was alright. Wolfenstein 2 started to introduce some weirdness, like throwing their fetishes into the game, but Youngblood is where the failure of the writing becomes really apparent. It's centered around these
I don't know Wolfenstein at all, really.
in between bouts of killing people. It's strange how frivolous it is with violence. Of course, that certainly isn't a new thing, but in this game, the main characters seem to delight in it.
Also, there is a thing. I'm pretty sure what's his face now. But Saints Row the Third is the reason I know who Burt Reynolds is. Otherwise, I'd never heard of him. So in the way of cultural references, there are things that if someone plays it that's maybe not American, different countries or whatever, then it raises awareness for certain other franchises and things in pop culture that are in other cultures.
That also isn't the weird part. It's that they delight in this violence and there is nothing really wrong with it.
Ryan Reynolds has a few
anti-heroes,
movies.
They're just regular old protagonists. And it's just silly and fun. It's strangely flippant. I mean, the New Order wasn't like that. It did have over-the-top violence, but BJ Blazkowicz was motivated by a righteous fury and rage. He never really reveled in killing or celebrated it. There's also the loud equals funny yelling. Some of the new Wolfenstein writing...
Some of these things are just plot things that could be done well, but it probably doesn't come across right because of the execution.
It just feels like the writers had some issues of their own to work on.
Balls. Why is it that balls are always used as some fucking default definition of badassery?
It feels like they wanted to make a political statement that they just weren't equipped to make. High on Life is another super obvious example. It has all of the same hallmarks: overly verbose characters, unnecessary swearing as if it was funny on its own.
It's Rick and Morty people that made High on Life, I think, from memory.
I mean, I like Michael Cusack. Damo and Darren at the train station is one of the most quoted videos here in Australia. But man, the
he's an
knifey
Aussie bloke
character
too, yeah.
didn't work. They had a cameo from Psychic Pebbles as well, who is usually absolutely hilarious. But in this game, I don't think the bit really worked. I noticed there's a certain...
Yeah, because if you write realistic young people dialogue, then people don't want to hear it because the young people dialogue sucks. That's realistic.
certain vocabulary as well. It wouldn't be unusual to hear words such as weird or shitty. And it is weird that the dude who, well, you know what he did, is calling anyone shitty. This kind of dialogue is really common. I feel like High on Life could have done with an editor. Somebody to cut like 90% of the dialogue, only leaving the best stuff in. As of right now, it seems like they believe that annoying equals funny. Similarly to loud equals funny.
It's got Borderlands
Destiny
music
2
in the
seems to have
background.
taken on some of this writing as well. Anna Bray is starting to sound like a Borderlands character.
My security frames are overrun. This is another example of your
I think that's one of the things that George Lucas did really well, was he's picked specific types of speaking styles and the way he wrote the dialogue so that it sounded different.
under-deliver attitude.
Huh. None of that sounded like, Anna, please help me. I need you. They're killing me. Ow.
A simple yes would satisfy.
So quirky and sardonic. This type of delivery sounds condescending. It reminds me of the boss from Office Space.
But isn't that the whole point of like establishing a relationship in dialogue between the characters? Is that you would have these back and forth communication?
Yeah. If you could just go ahead and make sure you do that from now on, that would be great.
I'll be honest, I do not see the appeal. And, you know, I can't really bring up Millennial writing without at least mentioning indie Earthbound-inspired game that's secretly about depression and mental health. These tend not to have the exact same tropes. Now that I think of it, it wouldn't be unusual to find similar stuff in indie games. It's just that people in the comments are going to bring this up if you're going to talk about Millennial games. So I think I'm starting to get a picture of it. The hallmarks of this style of writing that stick out to me from these and many more examples. The aforementioned vocabulary. Shitty, weird, gross, icky, yucky, yikes. My dude, my guy, y'all, and of course, decent human being. Another Millennial phrase I tend to hear is, the bar is on the floor. It's funny how a lot of these phrases are kind of childish. I'm not sure whether they're trying to be condescending and infantilizing to others, or whether they are themselves infantilized. They so often sound passive-aggressive. Another Millennial phrase that annoys me is do better, or be better. Again, talking down to you. It's insanely...
But that's what people say. Well, I haven't heard it as much in my circles, but it's what people say. I've seen that. It's how people actually talk.
Condescending. It just seems like a failure to grow up. A lot of the humor seems like it's from the people who've struggled to grow up since 2012. It seems like they're emotionally stunted. And this is probably just me reading into it. And I see a lot of crossover with
That's a lot
being
of assumptions.
stunted and all of...
I think they just have bad writers. I mean, the dialogue in that would make sense in the right setting, right?
The pop culture references. It seems like some kind of identity that they're trying to cling to, that they can't let go of. I mean, Fallout 2, all the way back then, was full of pop culture references, but I don't know, back then, being a quote-unquote nerd was kind of a subculture of its own. It wasn't really something people aimed to be. It's just a label people got slapped with for the activities and subculture they gravitated towards.
But, like, you know my point, right? It's like, yes, overuse of that type of dialogue isn't great. But it can work. But in the case of a lot of, like, the Borderlands series, it's not trying to depict a realistic type of culture like that. So why do you pick that style of dialogue?
It was to make fun of them. Now... nerd is like a market demographic. It seems that being a self-admitted nerd and being obsessed with pop culture is based purely around cynical consumption nowadays. And obviously nothing epitomizes this more than the Funko Pop, which is like a religious icon
here we go.
for millennials. The pop culture obsession seems to stem from...
Millennials age bracket. Just trying to think. 81 to 96 apparently.
From an inability or...
Because I'm in that spot where I'm not... it's in those couple of years that they're not sure if I'd be a millennial or a zoomer. I'm in that middle spot. Right at the end of 96.
Refusal to grow up. The kinds of references that were funny in 2007 and tolerable in 2012 are just embarrassing now. There are other hallmarks, like letting you pet the doggo, because that's a Twitter account, right? Having quips everywhere that undermine dramatic moments. Having an easy mode called Tell Me a Story or Story Mode. Letting you skip bosses or
I
parts
haven't
of the
looked
gameplay.
I haven't looked into the details exactly, but at one point it's like, oh yeah, I don't feel like I know millennials. On the 27th of December, 3 days before the crossover, because on one of the things they were debating the generational label brackets as so maybe that could be shifted one way or the other a couple of years. It's a bit confusing.
Making the game easier if you fail too many times. I also just wanted to mention a few tweets because people speak like this on Twitter, and I think that's where it comes from. And once you see enough of this, you start to recognize this style when you see it in media.
It's not just Twitter. Oh no, Chuck Wendig. Oh no. But it's not just Twitter, it's the internet in general. Yeah, people just like what they like now. Nerd isn't an insult. People like, yeah, sometimes joke about it back and forth. Going, haha, nerd, yeah. And then we just enjoy nerding out.
Tuesday, the day you realize that nothing can stop you because you are a magic skeleton packed with meat and animated with electricity and imagination. You have a cave in your face full of sharp bones and 5 tentacles at the end of each arm. You can do anything, magic skeleton. Between Bernie, my ex-wife, the tenant from hell, and general chump fuckery, this has been a cromulent fuck crustable of a day. Tommy needy drinky. Kanye is a teeny weeny little baby bitch muffin. What you'll notice is the playground insults mixed with swearing, and they're talking in a baby language, like with these invented words that they just came up with. Beyond that, there's all the references to student debt. So relatable, am I right, fellow millennials? Ironic that the people...
Life is strange, but people like Life is Strange. Funny about that, huh? But it accurately depicts that type of person in that type of setting. That's the type of way that they talk and everything.
People who talk about representing broader viewpoints and life experiences seem to make the same few jokes that only appeal to a tiny group of people who are like them. Degree in English from major coastal cities of the USA. The student debt thing is also meant to be their social commentary, and that brings us to the juiciest part, the politics. A game like Saints Row keeps referencing capitalism as if it was offering some sort of critique, but it's not really saying anything. A lot of these games seem to just reference political events or social issues because it's like they feel obliged to. They do these...
I think, who was it? Winston Churchill would put a new word in every one of his speeches to see if it would take off. He invented words and put a new one in each one of his speeches, as far as I remember.
Political things, not because they have anything to say, but because they think they have to say something. This is because of Twitter and just social media in general, at least partly. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, the complaints...
Some things just what the words mean, or a language barrier, which becomes apparent when you start talking about that type of brain rot stuff, lock on. Is that you start getting people that don't understand what you're saying, so you have to use other words to make yourself understandable, and so the words don't take off.
About how they're politicizing video games were coming to a head. We need to stop politicizing this escapist hobby. Then some Redditors from a place named Gaming Circle Jerk took these complaints and ran with them. They've been telling their singular joke for like 6 years now. Actually, Chud, games have always been political, then showing examples of old games and how they made some political statement. Every meme since then has been some variant of le gamers, le politics. It's also paired with the statement that all art is political, and games, as art, are making a political statement, even if they don't overtly comment on anything. Saying nothing is a sign that you tacitly affirm the status quo. You aren't fighting hard enough against capitalism if you aren't speaking out against it. And it seems that they've reached game devs with this message. I think it's a common enough sentiment that many game devs feel obliged to say something, to make a statement about politics, even when they don't really have anything of value to say.
And they just want to put it in this story without it making sense, is a lot of the thing. And that's just entertainment in general. Like, he's talking about games, but it's entertainment in general.
And it shows. Oftentimes these political allegories and references to capitalism just feel phoned in, like in Saints Row. It isn't really saying anything, it's just making the references because I guess it looks like that's what people want when you look at social media. Am I right? Do my moots on the Bird app agree with this? We talk about this all the time. Same with Borderlands. It's maybe trying to make a statement about evil corporations.
I hardly ever talk about it because I don't play the games that have the crappy writing most of the time.
Corporate asshat.
But you fight for corporations the whole time. And I just want to take a moment to compare the capital P politics in games versus how old games would present political issues. In all those older games, it was more of an idea that was presented. It was often aware of the nuance, and it didn't force your opinion on the matter. It'd perhaps present you with a choice and an ethical quandary to bring you to question your own beliefs. It respected the player's intelligence. Of course, the writers of those games had intent. They would frame things in such a way that it made their ideology seem favourable. But it'd never
sure you'd know,
force your
Lachlan.
hand. And it never felt like they were trying to force any message. The political message that could be gleaned from the game arises naturally as a result of the setting. Contrary to what Redditors claim, Fallout was not created as a political allegory. It was, first of all, a dumb, absurdly violent, ridiculously bleak game with crazy guns and mutants. There were of course ethical quandaries and political dilemmas presented as part of the setting that could be applied to the contemporary world. It never portrayed communism favourably. It didn't really say much of anything about it. It was mostly focused on America and American culture, and any of the critiques rose out of that setting. Now compare it to the politics in current games. It often feels like a
Yeah, they don't make sense in the world building setting, especially.
cynical reference to current thing. It's often
And also, like, certain games do present, oh yes, one part's bad because people are doing bad things that believe in that sort of thing. But yeah, and before Operation English.
things which do not suit the setting. It never explores any ideas in depth. It simply tells you things rather than presenting something and allowing you to think about it. I think that's the crux.
I mean, one other important thing was he said that it's like, well, it was aware of the nuances. Whereas a lot of the time I feel like the writers aren't aware of the nuances. They just write it in.
Of it.
And they don't think about how it works in the setting.
Respecting the player's intelligence, allowing you to work things out on your own, to choose for yourself, to come to your own conclusion. Of course, we can't have people making their own choice nowadays. They might make the wrong one. I think condescending sums it up perfectly. They think you're stupid. They're also kind of pretentious. A lot of this political writing presents the most basic opinions and acts like you've never heard them before, like they just blew your mind, like it's something revolutionary. Now, why did millennial writing rise in the first place? I legitimately think it is Twitter. Look, for a business's continued survival, it needs to adapt.
It's Twitter because it's probably the most public social media, because other ones are hidden like inside groups and things and certain subreddits and that sort of thing.
Constantly. When you stop growing, you start dying. So you need to look at current trends. What is an easy way to see current trends? Why, the way everyone communicates. Social media. I think that...
You're also trying to get a worldwide view because your target demographic could be not just one country for a game. So they're thinking about it from a business perspective rather than a creative perspective.
Writers, devs, and producers are getting their idea of what constitutes current trends from Twitter, which I think is really misguided, for the simple fact that Twitter does not represent broader society. Most of what you'll hear on Twitter comes from a very small, very vocal minority. And hey, for a while the FBI was basically deciding who is and isn't allowed to have a voice on that side. I think that producers should look elsewhere to get an idea of broader society, somewhere besides social media. It only elevates fringe voice.
Well, it's when you're trying to go to a, like, yes, you always have to specify target audience so that for your entertainment, but they're thinking of it so business minded and like, oh, we have to pander to this, that they just lower the quality of the writing.
I guess this does kind of destroy the whole argument that Twitter is just a private company which doesn't really control much of public discourse. Twitter, for a private company, holds an extreme amount of power.
When was this 1 year ago.
Over public dialogue. And it's the same with every social media site. I have to say, it was pretty funny to me seeing Unishek, the community manager for Halo Infinite, borrow some of the cynical and condescending language from Gaming Circle Jerk, only to get screenshotted and roasted on the site himself. It was hilarious to see that backfire, I will admit. So, in all, I guess the advice I'd give to producers is the same advice I'd give to everybody. Unplug. Shut off social media for a bit. Live in the real world. And don't be so condescending. And get to the point. Please subscribe. Thank you all so very much for watching.
Okay.
And goodbye. You could...
So he's just going, it's all because of internet. Okay, well, it's all because of internet. That's the reason why we have bad writing. Yes, of course.